Welcome to Real Life Renos, the podcast. My name is Karen Brown, and I am happy to welcome Ron Wickman joining us again as we continue our series on accessible housing. Ron is an architect who specializes in barrier-free design, and he's joining us from Edmonton. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
We've done a podcast on entry to a home, and in this podcast, we're going to look at vertical movement within the home. So to be clear, a bungalow is ideal, but that's just not the situation everybody finds themselves in. A two-story home is absolutely modifiable. Walk us through this renovation, Ron.
Yeah, so it's true. A bungalow is probably your best bet for somebody, especially somebody who uses a wheelchair. But the reality is, in Canada, we still build with basements. So if you want to get into your basement, you're going to have to think about some kind of vertical lift, an elevator or something on the stairs. So by the time you look at having an elevator, let's say in your house, whether that elevator is doing 2 stops, 3 stops, or 4 stops, the cost doesn't really vary much. So once you commit to an elevator in a house, then your options become much greater in terms of house hunting. When it comes to renovation work, one thing I've been talking with my clients about a lot more lately is, I'm dealing with clients who've already found their house, and now I get involved and I try to help them figure out how to make it accessible.
Right.
But in talking with some of my clients, they've told me about their experience looking for a house. So they've found themselves in this situation where they're using a wheelchair. So maybe for 20 some years of their life, they were walking. They were injured through an accident of some sort, and now they have a spinal cord injury, let's say, and they are using a wheelchair. So they go house hunting, and what I've been finding the consistent issue for my clients is that they're looking for a house that could accommodate an elevator. So that seems to be the first thing they look for, more so than the entranceway. So they think, well, we can always build a ramp of some sort. Like, that doesn't seem to be the biggest issue for them. The biggest issue is how do I get up and down this in the house? So they try to find houses, let's say, that have a big foyer at the entrance, because they think, oh, well, we just steal space from a closet, or maybe there's the big entranceway, we can sort of fit it in with the stairs, that sort of thing. So that's interesting to me, because I would have never thought about that myself. But that's definitely for somebody that's newly finds themselves with this disability, that seems to be a really big issue.
Right. And if they have a bungalow, it's not an issue at all. They need an open floor plan and everything on the main floor, like laundry not in the basement, for instance, and they're pretty much good to go. But if you've got a two-story house, we've got a plethora of 2-story houses in our stock now.
That's right. And generally it's more cost effective to build the same square footage on a two-story house than it is on a bungalow. And that largely has to do with the cost of land. So in Edmonton, compared to other parts of Canada, we're probably somewhere in the middle. Toronto, Vancouver, the cost of land is extremely expensive. So you start going 2 or 3 stories in those areas, just because you will save money that way. When I personally go into a house, the first thing I do is I look for a place for the elevator that could, even in a bungalow, could manage the 2 levels. So is there a spot on the main floor that when I go to the basement, it's kind of free and open down below, so that I could build the shaft for the elevator in that spot? So sometimes even in a bungalow with a fairly open plan, it's still an unfinished basement becomes easier to deal with than a finished basement, but it becomes could become a challenge. The smaller the bungalow is, the harder it is to find a space within the bungalow for the elevator. So often we have to look at adding on the elevator. And so a lot of times I'll add a small addition to the house, which allows you to get in at ground level get in the elevator, it takes you up to the main floor level, and also down to the basement. And if it's a 2-story house, then that same elevator would get you up to the second floor as well.
So that's an
So,
option.
so that's an option. That's a more expensive option. But again, the elevator itself, think about it taking up 6 feet by 6 feet of space. So
Right.
it's something that within an existing house that might be stealing a lot of space. So it's finding that spot where it's the least intrusive to the flow of the home, and sort of the most cost effective as well. So it's tricky. When the house has a front car garage, then I'll often look for the elevator location to be alongside the wall that the garage and the house share. So when you're in the garage, lower than the main floor level, you could enter the elevator from the garage, and then get into the elevator up to the main floor or down into the basement, or again a second floor. You get up to the second floor as well. Otherwise, if the elevator is located somewhere else in the house, then you still have to figure out a way to get from the garage floor level to the main floor level, which may mean an additional porch lift. So a porch lift is different than an elevator. A porch lift is just an open air platform that people might have seen them at the fronts of houses. So beside your main stairs to the front door is this piece of machinery that you wheel onto, and it takes you vertically up to the main floor level, and then you can enter the house that way. They're not very pretty to look at, but they do get you up to that level. So sometimes you need that in the garage, but then that takes up space, and so you effectively could eliminate a car stall. And so you might make a 2-car garage into a 1-car garage by having this lift as well.
And that chairlift that you talk about is used inside of homes, usually called a platform lift. And there's some pretty nice looking ones in there as well. They still take up space, but for people who are maybe listening to this and getting a bit spooked that, oh my gosh, an elevator is our only option, it's not. There are other options. There is a platform lift, and we'll get into talking about prices in a little bit. But there are also some lifts that people are probably more familiar with, especially if they watch TV, chair lifts or stair lifts, right? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So just for clarity for people listening, there's 4 types of, let's call them lifts or mechanical devices. So the first one I'll say is the elevator, and that's the best. If you make the elevator work, that's your best option. That can do multiple levels, and it's like one space that can do these multiple levels. The elevator is one option. Secondly is what they call a platform lift, a vertical platform lift. So that's something that generally can get you from the ground up to one level, usually less than 6 feet above the ground. So your vertical porch lift, which is far cheaper, far less expensive than the elevator, is limited in what it can do. It can only get you from ground to like a deck level, let's say, or to main floor level. Then the other 2 pieces of equipment are the types that can get you up and down stairs. So there is the chair lift, as you were mentioning, and that's the kind that we often see in commercials, where somebody would sit on a chair and it would go up or down the stairs. It's always easier to do that if the stairs are a straight run. But chair lifts can do 90-degree turns, 180-degree turns. They can do curves. And basically, that chair would either sit at the top or the bottom of the stairs when not in use.
Right.
And that's great for somebody who has mobility. They walk, but stairs might be quite draining on them physically, so they just don't want to do stairs that much in their day. If you use a wheelchair permanently, the fourth piece of machinery is called a stair platform lift. And the stair platform lift is one that also follows the incline of the stairs, but it's a platform that somebody in a wheelchair would wheel onto. And from your wheelchair, you would go up or down the stairs. And that really needs to be a straight run. That has to be a stair that is wide enough for the platform to fit in, and straight run. You need at least 5 feet at the top of the stairs and at least 10 feet at the bottom of the stairs. So most houses that I go to visit for the first time that are existing rarely have that kind of stair that has that, space at the top, space at the bottom, straight run, and wide enough. All those things have to come into play. Otherwise, major modifications are required to the stairwell itself.
Right. So it's levels of complexity.
Correct.
What kind of roadblocks would people be expected to encounter when they're looking at all of these options? You've talked about some of the roadblocks for an elevator. What about the stair lift?
The stair chair lift?
Yeah.
There aren't too many roadblocks for the chair lift itself, and that's why that's probably the most commonly used item for people, and that generally the audience that's targeted for that are seniors. So again, people that they can, once they're on a floor level, they can walk around and get to the kitchen, bathroom, all that kind of stuff. But just getting up and down the stairs all the time could be rather taxing on their energy levels. So the chairlift is a great option there. It can usually do almost anything. There's lots of different types of chairlifts too. There's ones that sort of fold up against the wall. Mm-hmm. So they take up, less space. The platform, the stair platform lift is the platform folds up against the wall when it's not in use. So it would either be housed at the top or the bottom of stairs when not in use. So you'd still have the ability to walk up and down the stairs without the platform getting in your way.
Okay. And do the stairs have to be any particular width to accommodate either of those?
So yeah, the platform lift I mentioned needs to be wider. I actually just found out very, very recently. I have to say that I do very few stair platform lifts. So for any of my clients that use wheelchairs, 99.9% of the time we go to the elevator. So just every once in a while, like maybe once every 10 years, I do the platform lift. And so I just happen to have one right now. And I just found out that the existing stair, which is 36 inches wide, is no longer wide enough for the current type of stair platform lifts that exist here in Canada. So the last time I did a stair lift, 36 inches would have worked, but it doesn't seem to be as easy to do now. There's new, more rigid code standards out there. The Canadian Standards Association has certain codes and standards that make it very difficult to work with an existing 36-inch wide stairwell, which is what you'd most commonly see in houses built, before the 90s for sure.
Right.
And even today, rarely do we build stairs that are wider than 36 inches unless they're, more luxurious homes.
Right. So what width would this stair lift need to be according to the new standards?
Yeah, 42 inches is what I'm being told, right? So, okay. So if you're designing a new house, then in new houses, I was always designing 42-inch wide stairwells, just because I wanted that wiggle room. But now I realize that, I might even make them 4 feet wide today now if I was doing a new house.
Right.
But again, like I said, my go-to is the elevator rather than the stair platform lift.
Right. So in terms of, watching TVs and looking at the stair lifts, I think we're all familiar with Acorn stair lifts, and
yeah.
We're not sponsored by anybody. So these companies that we're throwing out there don't even know we're talking about them. So but definitely do your research. But in terms of elevators, are there companies that you particularly find yourself going to?
Yeah, so the elevators have become really interesting. And I think one thing that's really, really worth mentioning is in my 30-year career now, doing this kind of work, accessibility, the elevator is the only product and construction item that I'm aware of that has not gone up in price.
Really?
So when I first started working, elevators were around $20,000, $25,000, $30,000, depending on what you were doing. Today, they haven't changed,
Really?
and there's a lot more options out there now. So that's very telling to me that 30 years ago I didn't have a lot of options. There were maybe one or two vendors that would supply these elevators, porch lifts, stair lifts. Now there's many options out there, and you can get all kinds of different features as well. So I associate it to being similar to going and buying a car. So you can go and get your economy model, and it'll get you from A to B, or you can do it with a bit more style and pay a little bit more money, and you're not going to get heated seats in an elevator cab, but you can get nicer finishes inside, nicer lighting. I still haven't seen one with the Muzak in it, but
it's coming.
You could probably get that too if you wanted to. So yeah, it's interesting, and you can get power door operators. So again, you just hit the button for the elevator, and the doors automatically open for you. You wheel in, you hit a button, they automatically close for you. Those sorts of things, they just add a little bit of cost to the basic model. And two companies that I can mention that, again, I've used them both. They're both good products, both bigger companies. So there's one, Garavanta's American company, and Severia is also an American company. So those two suppliers of lifts have got into the residential market and are taking advantage of higher demand for lifts, and in a good way, especially in new construction. So that's something that's a real plus, I think, because in time we'll have a housing stock that will provide more options for people when they're looking for an existing house to move into. Right now, your option is to find something that then you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to renovate, right? To get a house that overall can accommodate you now that you're in a wheelchair, let's say.
Right. We will put links to these companies in our show notes. I can imagine that some of our listeners right now are thinking back a few moments ago when you mentioned the price of an elevator, $25,000, $30,000, and they're just slapping their foreheads and thinking, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. Let's compare that, though, to the potential costs of a stair lift, because as we've already discussed, there are levels of complexity, and each time you need to make a modification or there's an additional run, the price goes up.
Right. So again, I made mention of the 4 mechanical devices that can get you up and down levels.
Right.
So starting at the exterior or interior porch lift. So again, that's something that's limited to about 6 feet. So that's something that can get you from point A to point B in less than 6 feet.
Okay.
And so that's kind of why they call it a porch lift, right? Because it's getting you from ground level up to the porch level.
Right.
Those are about $6,000 to $8,000.
And then installation on top of that.
That's supply and install.
Supply and install. Okay. That's pretty
Supply
good.
and install is about $8,000, and then depending on your situation, you do want concrete on the outside. If it's on the outside, you want a concrete base on the bottom, and you probably have to have a sidewalk that leads to it, and that sort of thing. So there'll be some added costs likely to all of that, but in the realm of things, you're thinking in that kind of terminology.
Okay.
The elevator, like I said, is the lowest I've ever heard of is $20,000, and that's your very basic model. And it can go up to about $40,000, which would have just about everything that you could wish for in an elevator.
All the bells and whistles.
Yeah. And then with the stairs, the chair lift is quite modest, typically around maybe $4,000. Again, depending on if it has to make turns, follow a curve, that sort of thing. But again, it's relatively inexpensive. So similar to the porch lift, maybe around $4,000.
Is that for one run though? I mean,
that's for one. That's right. That's for one run.
So if you have to do a 90-degree turn, that's another run. So that's another 4,000 or whatever. And if you want to go down to the basement, I mean, that's right. That can add up to the point where an elevator is actually more cost effective. So let's just acknowledge that.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. And even more so, again, the chairlift, you have to think about somebody with, yes, mobility issues, but not in a wheelchair. That's the chairlift. The stair platform lift is, yes, I'm in a wheelchair. And if you're in a wheelchair, you don't want a chairlift because you have to transfer from your wheelchair on. And I lived this with my dad. He had a chairlift at one time. And he would have to transfer over the stairs in his wheelchair. So if he slipped, made one false move, he's just tumbling down the stairs. So he's trying to transfer onto a chair. That chair takes him down to the basement level, where then somebody has to either bring his chair downstairs or he has to have a second wheelchair downstairs to transfer into. So he had it for less than a month and just got rid of it because he realized it just wouldn't work for him.
Right.
The platform lift, again, I'm just working on one right now. So I just got a price of $25,000. So a stair platform lift, which just gets you from one level to the other, so only one set of stairs, is $25,000. So for sure, if you had a 2-story house and you wanted to go up the stairs, main floor to basement or main floor to second floor, you're talking 2 stair platform lifts. So you're in the $50,000 range for those 2 lifts, whereas the elevator is still going to be under 40 for sure, right? Even if you get all the extra features. So yeah, the elevator just becomes the way to go. So the strategy, like I said, is to find the elevator location that eliminates the need for any other kind of lift, even the porch lift. Like I said, if you could have the elevator so you can get right in from the garage, then you eliminate any kind of porch lift needed as well, right? So that's where you have to again have some experience in doing these kinds of renovations and working on these projects to start to see similarities. So I kind of know what 1950 houses look like. They generally are bungalows, 26 feet by 42 feet. And then you get into the 60s, 70s, the 80s tend to be 2-story. That's when you start getting to 2-story houses with sunken living rooms, and they're a nightmare. Right. And 90s and 2000s. And today what's interesting is in a lot of our suburban areas, at least in Alberta here, Calgary and Edmonton, you're starting to see a greater variety of houses. So you're starting to see big homes, smaller homes. You're even seeing the introduction of lanes again, back lanes that were almost obsolete in the 80s and 90s. They're sort of coming back in some neighborhoods. Tall, skinny houses are becoming really popular, which again really forces you into looking at some kind of lift of some sort to get multi-levels. Right. So there's more variety out there, but I'd say the real problem is rarely is anything designed or built with what I would call an accessibility lens. So that means the designers and builders aren't thinking about the fact that maybe somebody in a wheelchair needs to use this home. So it's still a constant need to look at things that you then have to adapt to or renovate, right? Right. Which is unfortunate.
A couple of caveats here. When we're talking about pricing, I want to make sure our listeners understand that we are recording this at the end of June in 2023. So the pricing is only as good as today's date is, and the manufacturer that you may choose, as well as the contractor who installs it for you. So, we hope to give you some sort of guidance around pricing, but do your research. The second piece I want to mention is that no matter what you choose, whether it's an elevator or a chairlift, it doesn't really matter. They will require maintenance. So that's a cost that you have to factor in. And I know that One of the things that you might want to consider for safety reasons is also the use of an external battery of some sort in case the power goes out in your house. Particularly if you are somebody who is in a wheelchair 24/7, you don't want to be caught in an elevator when the power goes out, or caught on one level when you mean to be on another level. So that's an option that is probably worth considering as well. Or do you even consider it an option? I don't consider it an option to have that backup battery. I think it's essential.
Yeah, it is. And they're generally speaking, the elevators do come with a battery backup, and it's somewhat limited. So it'll, if you're in the basement and the power goes out, you'll definitely be able to get up to the main floor and out of the house. You could probably chance it by doing that again, 5-10 more times. Then you're flirting with potential disaster. You can then get a secondary backup, which would give you greater flexibility. But they do come with battery backups. But your point about research is really important. I was thinking about this too, and I'm just working on a project right now where the builder mentions they were marking up some drawings that we're working on. So I'm working with this builder. They've done a house before with an elevator, and they just made a note on the drawings for our drafting person that we have to make sure we have a sump pump in the elevator pit. So in the basement, you need to have a pit for the elevator to sit in, and the elevator platform has like a thickness to it. So for it to be level with the basement floor, there has to be a pit for the platform to sit in.
Right.
And yes, it's true that the old style of elevator needed a sump in the pit. Because any water that could get in that area would be a problem. They do make elevator shafts and elevators with what they call a kind of a pitless shaft. So you don't need the sump, right? So it's really good to do your research and talk to the manufacturers, the suppliers of the elevators, so that they, much like shopping for windows, they can tell you the subtle differences between their product and the competitors, right? So maybe theirs is more expensive by $1,000 or $2,000, but you get all these extra features, these safety features that make you want to go there, right?
Right.
If you can afford it, and I go back far enough that the original residential elevators were all of the type that you actually had to hold the button the whole time So if you're on the main floor and the elevators in the basement, you have to hold the button on the outside for the whole time until it gets up to the level. And then you go inside the elevator shaft and you have to hold the button the whole time it's moving up or down. They don't have those anymore. So those were the ones that were like $25,000. So not only do you get an elevator for $25,000 today, but you get one that actually functions truly like an elevator that you would see in an office right. Space, right? So the not only is it the same price, but it's just a much better product, which again says a lot about the fact that more and more people are demanding and wanting to see these elevators. And here in Alberta, and I can't speak of elsewhere in Canada, but even in terms of getting inspections, the elevator itself, the piece of equipment, generally didn't get looked at by an inspector, like a city inspector. They would come and look at the shaft and make sure that it meets structural standards, but the elevator itself really didn't get looked at. It was just assumed that whoever supplied it would be building something that's safe. But there have been some, and we don't need to get into this, but fair to say there's been some issues in the States, especially where there's a bit more of a culture of, suing, where little children have been able to kind of get their way into elevators and get stuck in areas that they shouldn't. And so there's been some much stronger standards now and regulations created to eliminate these potential issues. So I think you can safely say today that elevator, and this is again just like automobile culture, right? We continually make cars safer to drive in, especially in cases of accidents. And that's the way the elevators are going as well. So you can't really be in a situation where somebody could open the door in the basement, get in the shaft, and then have the elevator cab sort of crush you, right? It can't happen without like a bomb or something blowing up the door to get it open or something. But it's just the safety features are there. But that is something that I find I do have to make sure I talk to my clients about, because they'll ask me, well, I have small children, I'm really nervous about this elevator, and I'll say my piece, but I'll definitely get them to talk to the manufacturer, because they can say and demonstrate in a far better way than I can about their product and how it improves safety. And again, that might be the reason why you choose one supplier over the other, is because they speak about safety in a much more vigorous way than maybe their competitor, right? And that's very important to you. It should be important to everybody.
Right. Well, we've given our listeners lots of options here and lots of language around the options that are available and terminology that can be used. We've also talked about pricing, so that's really good, and some caveats, do your homework and so forth. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
We talked last time about the no-step entrance, and I often mention when I talk to people about myself as a designer and getting the sort of the emotional rewards. Like I hear about how much something like a no-step entrance or an elevator can improve one's life, and so often I do hear from clients that say, you know what, I got my elevator installed in my house and I haven't been in my basement in 20 years. Like I haven't seen my workshop that I spent hours and hours in every day building, doing things. I haven't seen it in 20 years. And now I'm down there and I'm back at it. And I don't know how much more reward you can get than that. For me as a designer, it's amazing, but for the person who actually gets to experience that, right, and get to tinker around and build things and be down in a space that they once really loved and had to spend so much time away from, $20,000 or $25,000 or $40,000 seems like a small bit of money to have that experience, right? So I don't think people should lose sight of that. It's a very important thing in my opinion.
Gives them back their life. Well, that's a really good spot to end this podcast. So my thanks to Ron for joining us on this. Stay tuned for our next podcast. We're going to talk about something that everybody uses, everybody wants, and you will like this podcast. We're going to talk about bathrooms. So until then, I hope you'll join us for that, but thank you for joining us today. Real Life Renos, the podcast, is a production of Reno Studios, executive produced by Karen Brown. This is Real Life theme, music, and lyrics by Jane Carmichael, recorded at Swamp Songs Recording Studio in Lucan, Ontario, engineered by Matt Weston. Thank you for tuning in.